Hey class. So this time we're back with a continuation of last week's discussion on media environments. But this time we're going to go a bit deeper. We're going to go into surveillance capitalism and algorithms. So now you're really going to get into starting going into the deep of social media. Because I think up to now we've kind of gone over the surface level uses of it, and now you're going to start understanding the technology that is behind it and extractive abilities that it kind of does. So today's going to be a bit of a longer lecture, not too much longer, but just enough to kind of go over these topics because there's a couple things in algorithms that I think you really need to know about. The homework is, of course, going to be two different things. It's going to be an assignment and a discussion, and they're going to be based on two basically similar but different aspects of this discussion that we're going to have today. And what we're going to talk about today is really kind of a broad overview of how extractive technologies work on social media. After we learned an entire week of the Facebook whistleblower's testimony, as well as the aftermath of the Facebook outage, we've learned a lot about what Facebook and its technologies actually do, which, by the way, all of the researchers that I know, including myself, have known for many years. But it was kind of interesting to find out that Facebook knew this. And I've been explaining this to a lot of people lately about what did Facebook do wrong. And it wasn't that Facebook so much does something wrong, if that's a thing, but what we find out is that Facebook is aware of how bad it is for people's health. It's one thing for us to say we know it is, but it's another thing for the company to acknowledge that as well. And the company also acknowledged that it said, well, we may be aware, but at least we're doing these types of studies, kind of giving themselves credit for at least looking into the software. On the other hand, maybe just don't be bad, that could be how it is. So today we're going to talk about some of the tech that actually operates these platforms and things that have happened within the algorithmic structures over the course of the last several years. And I'm going to make references to some of the primary readings that really you should do if you really want to get into this type of understanding of how social media works. This is obviously going to be a very big research field in the future, based not just on what happened in the last week, but really how social media affects us forever. This, by the way, is my favorite part of how we understand social media. I think this is the most important way that we should gain critical media literacies about social media. I know I'm a memeticist, but remember, memes themselves are cultural underpinnings, or kind of like the art history of the internet, which does dictate a flow and an understanding of how the internet actually operates visually. But algorithms and the technology that live inside the black box are really what the tech is that operates our web. And that's going to be part of our assignment today, is how do we understand that black box? So first, I want to go over again what it means to have platform capitalism. So platform capitalism is basically how platforms operate. The way platforms operate, any of these social media sites, is that they are free. Excluding maybe LinkedIn or a couple other things. But there's the freedom, the idea that you don't pay for these sites. There used to be a phrase that was used way back that says, if you do not pay for something, you are the product. Nothing is free. Okay, we just got to get that out of the way. There's no such thing as free. Something is always exchanged one way or another. And if you're not paying for social media, it has to be supported one way. So what it does is it converts you into the product. And it does that through two ways. One, labor, immaterial labor. So immaterial labor means when you post on Facebook, you don't consider that work. You don't consider that job. You don't consider that actually doing something. But to the platform, they see that as immaterial labor. You're working to make the platform operate. That is extractive. So extractive data means that every word you type is actually considered labor from their end. They're always considering is something you're making for them to make the platform work. That's extractive behavior. It's extracting you through the system. The second thing is data surplus. So data surplus is the data you don't realize you're creating at any and all given times. So immaterial labor becomes surplus all the time. And surplus labor is kind of like that understanding that when you are at Stop and Shop and you use your Stop and Shop card to get points or get reduced cost of a product, your phone number is attached to that Stop and Shop card. Your phone number is also attached to Facebook, which means when you're at Stop and Shop or Walgreens or Duane Reade or CVS and you're using your membership card, you're technically still on Facebook because that card sends its data to Facebook. And that card's data creates this surplus, this extra data that's being used outside of your internet. So when you're offline, you're never really offline. You would encounter online algorithms all the time, all day long. You may not see it because you're constantly not thinking about it, but when we're understanding how these flows are actually operating it, they're operating through it. If you're wearing a wearable, like a watch, or if you're wearing something that is giving that data back to your system. Your phone is collecting your location data at all given times. If you go into your privacy settings, you could find a setting called frequent locations, and you could see your phone tracking you. It actually is deep down in the settings inside of privacy, location services, location tracking, frequent locations. If you go in there, you'll see everywhere you've been. And trust me, if you're using an Android, it's even worse, because Google, being one of the biggest extractive data machines on the planet, is constantly keeping track of where you are. To the minute, it knows exactly where you are, and that's data surplus. That's the information that you don't really think about it. Now, here's some things about this, some things we want to go over, and this is in continuation of our previous conversation and you guys watching Nosedive on Black Mirror. As Ryan mentioned, that all social media is a collection system. It is collecting. So it is about how much we give the machine, but it's also about the fact that the social media is collecting as well. It's not just about us giving that. And as Giovanna mentioned, it should be used to improve social media. And that's a really good point. What happens inside the black box should be used to improve it. Obviously, these systems can't work without collecting data, but shouldn't we know that it's making the system better? So 3 things I want to go over. One is the understanding of what happens when we start using these things. So let's go over the 3 different scenarios that we've learned about. One, Facebook's algorithm that we've learned in the last week that Francis Hogan has talked about in front of the Senate. What it is that the algorithm itself is designed specifically to predict what you might like in the future. As we talked about, an algorithm is a prediction technology. It's designed to take cumulative data and predict a variable or significant outcome that may make you make that decision. And it's really important to kind of understand that, as we'll get to later in this discussion, about how important predictive technologies can be for you and a platform. What was interesting is that Facebook's algorithm pushes you towards more significantly niche groups once you're in it. And what she found out is that when you join just your basic group, if it has some sort of partisan slant one way or another, the algorithm purposely pushes you towards something much more extreme. And what she was saying is that Facebook is aware that sometimes when you join a partisan group, you're going to be pushed into QAnon, which is an extremist ideology that's on these platforms and is a digital-based thing. But the system, Facebook, is aware that the algorithm is predicting that you'll join that because it's all about engagement. So what she's saying is for the likes, the engagement, the follows, that's how Facebook's algorithm is actually operating. It's about engagement, the likes. Now, as we saw back when we watched Generation Like, every time somebody likes your material, you get a small dopamine hit, small little bit of happiness. And again, that causes you to actually do immaterial labor. It makes you work more for the system because you feel like it's a reward-based system. And so Facebook is aware of these reward-based systems, but also aware that these reward-based systems make you feel like shit. They're designed almost specifically to degrade you so that you participate more because the only place you can get that reward is using their platform. So that's kind of a recursive element to that. Now, all these platforms are using algorithmic feeds at this point. And what that means is that all of these platforms are using these types of feeds to kind of give us a better sense of how to use. The term that they use is time spent. They want more time spent on the platform. The more time you spend on the platform, the more it's going to profit them and their advertisers. When somebody buys an ad that goes on your Instagram feed when you're flicking through, they're not just hoping you see one Instagram ad and you're like, okay, I'm good with Instagram for the day. They're hoping you come across many ads because many of those ads may never ever work for you, but one of them might. But if you don't have time spent on the platform, you may miss the ad that works. In other words, the longer you're on that platform, the more likely it is you'll be interacting with an ad that is successful. They are well aware of this. YouTube's feed is much different. YouTube's algorithm is designed to both cause your feed to operate, so you're pushed into content that you would like to watch because it has the play next feature. In other words, when you're watching a video, it suggests a video for you to watch afterward. And it also has this ability for you to want to join the community. And so when you're making content on YouTube, it actually helps you understand that not only the algorithm chooses what you're going to, but the network of similar channels also helps you decide on where you're going to navigate those platforms. So if you're a creator or a watcher, you're participating in its algorithmic outcomes. This can go poorly. And so as I teased last week, there was an incident in 2017 that actually caused YouTube to reconsider its algorithm, and that's called Elsagate. And Elsagate was a very disturbing event that occurred on YouTube and written about in James Bridle's Something is Wrong on the Internet essay, which eventually became a book. And he wrote about something is wrong on the internet because what he noticed was that not only were algorithms telling you what videos to choose or go to next, but it was actually inspiring algorithmic content to be created. In other words, the bots that were choosing the videos were also part of a larger network of people basically figuring out how to make the bots create content. And the bots were watching you watch. The worst thing is that they were watching how children watched. Many people use iPads or YouTube to kind of put in front of their child to basically a consumption machine, almost like a digital babysitter. It's not advised at all, but it is something that happens. The worst part about this is that children really do the time spent thing. Whereas we as critical adults may not like a piece of content and we'll hit next or we'll skip to another video, a child will just consume in linear form. When the video ends, the child will just let the next video appear. So when there's cartoons or Spider-Man or Elsa, these become videos that are watched more than other things, cars or trucks driving around. Now what if a bot were to create the content? It would start thinking, well, the child likes this, the child likes that, and I would want this to be very much part of what I'm going to be consuming. Now, because the rest of YouTube is not really a safe space, it really started incorporating content that was very bad for children. In other words, the extremist type of content. So the made-up cartoons that were made by bots for children to consume had videos of Elsa and Spider-Man drinking together or getting in arguments or doing things that were more adult behavior that were really not great for children, but it would provide engagement. Children saw these actions and wanted to watch more of them, and it started creating an algorithmic feedback loop. In other words, like I said last time, social media has no ability to not do something to its extreme. So the videos themselves became more extreme, thereby creating more of an algorithmic desire to go to that next step. YouTube got caught and deleted somewhere in the range of 100,000 bad videos. Think about how many that is. Just like Facebook is aware it created irreparable damage to teens, female teens between 12 and 16, YouTube was aware that it created irreparable damage to children. It decided it was going to make a new app called YouTube Kids, which was supposed to coordinate it off from there, which kind of also gave Facebook the idea to make Instagram Kids, which they nixed completely because of this incident with the whistleblower recently. Maybe these types of social media aren't for children. Maybe that's what it is. And so these algorithms are really the darkest part here, is that these choices that are made by the system are always coded into what comes next. Probably the biggest black box we have. And the reason we call it a black box is because it comes from an engineer's term. A black box is something that you know the beginning part and you know the end, but you're not sure what happens in the middle part here. We assume it works, but it's like your phone. Your phone is a black box by literal standards. You know how to use it. You could talk on it, it connects you to the human on the other side. You could text on it, it connects you to the human on the other side. We have no idea how that works. Algorithms are black boxes within the black box. We have no idea how those work, and it's completely opaque because these are private companies. Now, if you scale that up to something like TikTok, a Chinese company who also uses the version of TikTok in China known as Douyin, the algorithm in TikTok is what's known as a content-based algorithm, which is different than your other algorithms, which are feed-based or engagement-based. In other words, in Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, when you like, click, share, it creates the algorithmic switch. It knows based on the content similar to your engagement with it. Whereas TikTok is built much more on content aware. So if you watch a TikTok video, over 20% of it already knows what that video is about. TikTok's algorithm uses machine learning or artificial intelligence to watch your videos. But it watches it in a way that categorizes it. It detects human beings, it detects dances, it detects objects, it detects systems. It detects all of these ways of understanding how these systems interact with what is actually on the screen. In other words, if it were to watch this video, it would just simply see vlog. It would see a simple version of this. The content, because it has AI that reads the voice, it would know the content that I'm speaking about. So it would start thinking, well, this is about algorithms. This is about black boxes. And the next videos that you might see might encourage more learning videos, or they might encourage more talks about algorithms or technology, because it's content aware. That means the more you watch something on TikTok, the more it feeds you that thing, which gets really weird sometimes because it predicts something that you were thinking of, but rather you didn't say out loud, and it starts appearing. As much as we think that these systems are constantly listening to us, it would be way too much data to record everything we say. What it does more likely is it incorporates all of our data surplus, including the time we spend watching videos on any given app, into the feed that creates what's next. You have to keep a couple of things in mind when we think about algorithms. Algorithms are math. They're just math, but they're made by human beings. Somebody has to code the algorithms. Machines do not code these algorithms, which means when somebody, a human, codes an algorithm, they put their accidental bias into the code. In a very disturbing story from 2015, a man, you may or may not remember this, but there was a end of the year video on Facebook. It would tell you your most engaged post. It would celebrate it. This is the most engaged post you had of your year. Hooray, with balloons and things. And unfortunately, a programmer had lost his daughter during that year, and his most engaged post that year was his announcement of her passing. And Facebook put that in a thing that celebrated, this is your most engaged post. How terribly grim, how sad to re-earth this terrible story in a celebratory manner. Facebook acknowledged that it was because the bias inside of their code, that the people who code the algorithms to make those celebratory things may not have bad things happen to them. Bad things don't happen to everybody, and so the coder, the Silicon Valley coder, may not have understood that there are bad things that also get lots of engagement. It's a blind spot inside of code. You will read a piece of Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction tonight, which tells you that. You're also going to read a bit of Shoshana Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism, which is one of our favorites. I'm just going to read you a couple of bits from this massive, massive book, okay? You don't have to read this book, okay? But I did, but you don't have to. But I want to return now to that if it's free, you're the product bit that I talked about before. In the introduction to her book, In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff says, "We are not surveillance capitalism's customers. Although the saying tells us, if it's free, then you are the product, that is also incorrect. We are the sources of surveillance capitalism's crucial surplus, the objects of a technologically advanced and increasingly inescapable raw material extraction operation. Surveillance capitalism's actual customers are the enterprises that trade in its markets for future behavior." That's the big switch that Shoshana wants to point out. Now, a lot of us, as she mentions further in this paragraph, feel like this isn't that big of a deal. We don't have to worry about this too much. This isn't something that we have to think about. This is just how platforms work. And she writes, "It disposes us to rationalize the situation in resigned cynicism, create excuses that operate like defense mechanisms. I have nothing to hide," or find other ways to stick our head in the sand, choosing ignorance out of frustration and helplessness. In other words, she feels like sometimes we feel resigned to this because we have no control over this. But she later says, much further in the book, she later says that there's a really important factor in here that you have to keep in mind, which is that algorithms are predictive tech. And that means in surveillance capitalism, the ultimate end point of a lot of these surveillance tech is control of your future, is control of the outcome. She writes it in terms of a book. When you author a book, when you write it, so I've written one, I know this example, or when you write a paper, you already know the paper will be finished. You're aware of its finished product. You are aware of what it will become. It is a paper, I am handing it in. It is a book, I am putting it on a bookshelf. But you are aware of its entire system. I know the beginning, the middle, and the end. I know how to submit it on Blackboard, so on and so forth. You have the right to your future. You know exactly how you're going to be in control. We call that human agency. What she says about this is that a lot of this tech, it does not imply total authority over the future, of course, only over my piece of the future. In this way, the assertion of freedom of will also asserts the right to the future tense as a condition of fully human life. In other words, part of our rights as humans is the right to our own future. So how did they get away with it, Shoshana writes? Surveillance capital's new story begins with a behavioral surplus discovered more or less ready-made in an online environment, when it was realized that the data exhaust clogging Google servers could be combined with its powerful analytic capabilities to produce predictions of user behavior. The prediction products become the basis of preternaturally lucrative sales process that ignited new markets in future behavior. New markets and future behavior are what really the book is about. There I saved you 700 pages. So I saved you some time going through that. Now you're still going to read a piece of it because I think it's really important for you to read Shoshana Zuboff's writing in this case, because that is really where we're going to stake our futures. And if our futures are in our hands, we need to be aware of how the technology itself tries to work with that. Remember, this is not about agency or free will. Keep that in mind. You still have free will. You still have agency. It isn't about them taking that from you. What it is them turning that into a profitable system that you don't know how it works. That's the difference. It's not about your inability to make choices or know how the future operates, but it really is about we should be aware of the way the systems actually are doing these things. What does a content-aware algorithm do? How does it work? What does it mean to be pushed into smaller places? How do machines even make content for YouTube? I don't even understand. We would take years. It's taken years of my life to understand this in a way that I could even explain it, no less even try to get to the point of actually understanding the tech that does it. It would take us forever to do that. We should have a more accessible way of getting knowledge of how these systems actually operate. Because if we don't, this is just stage one of many stages over the next 10 to 15 years of development in tech. Do you think they stop? They don't stop. They just keep developing this as it goes on and on and on into the future. So your two pieces of homework are pretty fairly easy. They're pretty well explained on the blackboard as well. But you do have to incorporate what we've talked about in here into that assignment. I want you to watch a short, strange, interactive documentary called Do Not Track. And I want to know your opinions on that. It's a very interesting piece. You'll see. You'll understand when you see it online. But you could play with just the first episode. If you'd like, you could go on if you want to learn more. But I do want you to see how the data is extracting off of your system. And then I also want you to do the black box response, which is a question about how we would operate within the black box of social media and what you think of it after you've done the readings and listened to this lecture. So it's based on this lecture and the readings. And yeah, I think now we're about halfway through the semester. So we're gonna start getting into the deeper aspects of what social media does, because it doesn't just have the effect of operating our predictive futures, but also how we work as communities. What happens when people get involved with things that are unhealthy for them and they aren't sure what they actually are? What happens when somebody goes down a rabbit hole so deep, we can't find their way out of it? We should be aware of how to help people and help ourselves understand these tech, because we're using them and they become so integral to our lives that we have to kind of use them. So it is our responsibility, and it is about critical social media understanding. And that's what is part of this class and part of what your lives will be. So, as this makes more sense than usual, stay curious and stay vigilant and stay healthy.